Edit.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Professor Eric Lindsay. This is the 10th video in my series of the fundamentals of music theory. Today we're going to talk about figured bass, a framework developed in Italy in the late 1500s for keyboard players, lutenists, and other instrumentalists to create harmonies and accompaniments on the fly, kind of like a precursor to the jazz symbols that we decoded in previous videos. Let's dive into it. Figured bass is a shorthand system for notating harmonies above the bass line, primarily seen in 17th and 18th century accompaniment parts. Figured bass notation looks like a bass line with numbers written below. These numbers, called figures, indicate the intervals above the bass note that should be played to form harmonies. In this system, any bass note without figures indicated beneath is going to imply a chord in root position. This can be closed position, meaning a generic third and fifth above its note, or an open position where the third and fifth are doubled or assigned to voices over an octave away. The exact voicing is to the player's discretion, which means that there are various ways to realize figures. The figured bass is going to indicate whether a note in the bass is the root of the chord. 5-3 is a symbol where it's a triad in root position, since we're asked to add a note, a fifth and a third above the bass. If you see a 6-3 figure, you're supposed to play a first inversion triad, and for a second inversion triad, the other chord tones are going to be a fourth and a sixth above the bass, so we indicate this with a 6-4 figure. And a 3-5-7 means that we're playing a third, fifth, and seventh above the bass. In other words, a seventh chord, which will crop up a lot in the dominant chord at the ends of phrases. Sound easy to track? Not so fast, because you're not likely to see all of these numbers beneath each bass note. Figured bass uses a lot of shorthands to reduce clutter. Intervals of a fifth and a third above the bass are going to be assumed unless specified otherwise. So, no figures above the bass means play a root position chord, meaning you'll rarely see 5-3 written. Most of the time, 6-3 for first inversion will be abbreviated to just 6, as the third is just implied, and seventh chords will often be shortened to just 7. As I've mentioned before, a very important thing to note is that figured bass only indicates generic intervals, which will be a flat, natural, or sharp only if the key signature specifies it. So if we're in C major and we see a sixth beneath an E, the resulting chord is going to be a C major triad in first inversion. But if you see the same E and figure, but we're in the key of A major, now we're looking at a C sharp minor triad in first inversion, since there's a C sharp and a G sharp in the key signature. Capiche? The only time that figured bass is going to indicate a specific interval is if there's an accidental involved to modify the key signature. So a sharp 3 indicates a third above the bass is going to be sharp. A slash through a number or a plus also raises the corresponding note by a half step. If an accidental appears alone, it modifies the third above the bass. So you see a bass note with just a natural sign beneath it or a sharp beneath it, it's referring to a third above the bass. Moving figures above a stationary bass indicate stepwise lines in one of the upper voices while the bass holds its note. So for example, a 7 followed by a 6 over a C means playing a seventh, which is a B, which is then moving to an A while that bass holds the C. Historical accompanists could decode these figures at sight, meaning that figured bass serves as performance instructions, not just as an analytical tool. Let's take a look at a bass line and see if you could realize these figured bass symbols in an accompaniment. I have here a 4-bar bass line in the key of E flat major. So to prep you for realizing figured bass, I want you to first be able to visualize the chords in the key of E flat major. So go ahead and write out the triads in this key, labeling each scale degree with the quality of chord we'd expect. So which chord is major? That's the 1, the 4, and the 5. Which one is minor? 2, 3, and 6. And remember the diminished 7 chord. Remember to capitalize your Roman numerals according to the chord quality of each sonority. Once we've got that, let's take a look at this bass line. Looking at it, we see only a few instances of a bass figure. That means that all the notes without bass figures are in root position. So, no symbol present implies 5-3. Let's start by labeling the Roman numerals beneath each one of these chords. So, I see here on the very downbeat, a 1, because nothing is implied, and that is scale degree 1 in the key of E flat. So that is our 1 chord. Same with the last note of that chord, of that bar. The next measure has two of the interior notes on B flat and C. So if I look at B flat, I know that is the fifth of the key of E flat, so that is our 5 chord. And C is the 6th scale degree in the case of E flat major, and the 6th scale degree is a minor 6. Going to the penultimate bar, I see the A flat in the key of E flat, that's the 4 chord. Going down to an F, that's a 2nd scale degree in E flat, that's our 2 chord. Followed by a B flat, which is our dominant in the key of E flat, that is 5. And then we see an interesting figure tip going on to the next note. And then we have the downbeat of the last bar, root position, 1 chord, so back to 1. Next, remember that a 6 is going to be shorthand for a first inversion triad, where the chordal third is in the bass. So for each instance of the 6th bass figure, imagine that the root of that chord is a third beneath that note, and write that Roman numeral there. So the second note of measure 1 is the leading tone, or scale degree 7, meaning that the root of that chord is a third below, or the 5th of this scale. That's our dominant chord. So thus, that is the dominant chord in first inversion, that is a 5-6 chord. On the downbeat of the second measure, we have a G with a 6 beneath. 6 is the 3rd scale degree, meaning that the root is a third beneath the 3rd. In other words, that's our 1 chord. So this is a first inversion tonic triad, our 1 chord. The end of that bar is the same chord. The only other figure we have is a 7 beneath our penultimate chord, meaning that while the B flat plays in that bass, that is our 5 chord, another voice is going to be an octave above someplace. It's going to have a 8 at the octave, and then it's going to move to a 7th in passing. Onto the second half of that note, it's going to suggest a very brief 5-7 chord. And there it is. That is our entire chord progression. So as far as realizing these, what notes to play at the same time, you would think that all we'd have to do is take the notes from our scale diagram and map them onto the accompaniment, right? Well, this is going to give you the right pitches, but not necessarily the right voice leading, which are the rules that are going to result in the smooth, stepwise motion and carefully controlled consonance versus dissonance that we'd expect in common practice tonal style. Here's what it would sound like if we just played block chords. And instead, to be in the appropriate style for what we were writing, common practice, Baroque and classical era style music, we want this to be a much smoother stepwise motion. To do this, we need to arrange the notes of each chord in that right hand in such a way as to minimize movement between the chords. Notice how each of these voices are moving almost entirely in stepwise motion the entire time, as opposed to jumping around in a block formation. The rules that govern voice leading in this style is going to be the topic of our next video, so stick around.